Hello and welcome back to the Stidham Stardom podcast. This one for Week 16, Championship Week in fantasy football for the vast majority of gamers. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter, where I post is at BChat50. And I'm going to start right off at the top with a Stidham that if you had told gamers this back in July or August, they'd get to their championship game and you'd be sitting this player, they would call you crazy. But I am advocating sitting Aaron Rodgers this week. Even with the Honey Badger out for the remainder of the year for the Arizona Cardinals, it's a bad matchup for Aaron Rodgers. The Cardinals defense has been great at locking down receivers. The receivers have struggled to create separation for Aaron Rodgers this year. He's averaging just 241.4 yards passing per game. His 29 touchdowns are nice, but not really adding a lot in the running game. He's fallen short of 275 yards passing in 5 straight games and short of 250 in 4 of those contests. So not playing at an exceptionally high level from a fantasy perspective lately. Playing really well at a reality level, but you need more fantasy points, and he's just not giving them to you. Quarterbacks who I would start over Aaron Rodgers this week include Tyrod Taylor, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Matthew Stafford, possibly Kirk Cousins, though that's really dependent on how good you feel about him on the road. Really a toss-up there. And then obviously the forthcoming start quarterback, but I'll kind of keep him off for now and surprise you when we get to him. At running back, I would advocate sitting Chris Ivory. Ivory's been a talented runner this year, but you can't pick up fantasy points if you're on the bench. And lately, Bilal Powell has really cut into his playing time. Powell played more snaps than Chris Ivory last week. That's happened a few times here over the last 4 weeks. Game flow is going to dictate which back is out there more. The Jets are 3-point underdogs at home. Not a huge spread, but it's unlikely the Jets are going to race out to a big lead and use their sledgehammer back to milk the clock. That means that Ivory going to be limited on touches if there isn't a big lead or if the game doesn't stay close. Tom Brady, always capable of hanging some points and actually getting this team out to a big lead, and that would sound the death knell for Chris Ivory because he's not going to be out there in passing situations. Bilal Powell has become a weapon in that passing attack for them behind Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker. Really, he's been their third option. So Powell cutting into Ivory's playing time too much to feel good about using Chris Ivory in championship week. Earlier in the season, Ivory was held to just 41 yards rushing on 17 carries. He did save his line with a touchdown reception, but since he's only scored 1 touchdown reception this year, if you're banking on that recurring this week, I'd say you're making a bad bet on that. So I would sit Chris Ivory this week. Going hand in hand with sitting Aaron Rodgers, I would not use Randall Cobb this week. In fact, I have him on a championship roster. He was one of the easier players for me to bench. The Arizona Cardinals secondary has been excellent locking up receivers. They rank 4th defending number 2 receivers, 7th defending number 1s, and other receivers. So whether you want to include Cobb as an other because he plays a lot of time in the slot, if you want to include him as the 1 because he's the top receiver, either way, it's going to be a tough draw according to Football Outsiders. The Cardinals not giving up many fantasy points to receivers, and I mean, Cobb is clearly the top receiver on that team, so I expect that talented secondary to take him away. Even in PPR formats, I just don't think he's going to get enough touches to be even a wide receiver 3 this week. Maybe a fringe flex, but that's really pushing it. At tight end, I'm going to advocate sitting one of the breakout stars of the position this year, and that's Tyler Eifert. Eifert is touchdown dependent, and the Broncos have allowed just 6 touchdowns to tight ends this year. In his last 4 games, his high water mark for yardage in a single game is 42. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he's not going to do enough to get you the type of points you need for him to be a tight end 1. He's not getting a lot of yardage. He's not getting a lot of receptions. He hasn't bested 3 receptions in that 4-game stretch either. So even in PPR formats, he's not getting enough cheap points with those receptions. So Tyler Eifert, not a guy who I'm starting in most leagues. He might have some rust to shake off as well. I mean, if you're between Tyler Eifert and Will Tye, you can start Eifert. But if you've got other options, if you've been filling in with a guy like Julius Thomas, maybe you drafted Eifert and Antonio Gates because Gates had a suspension and you were banking on Eifert as a breakout candidate. Guys like that, I mean, Eifert was not a high pick, so it's not unreasonable to think that there are two good tight ends on most Eifert rosters. It's also not that crazy to think that at some point in time, you scooped up another tight end, a guy like Ben Watson, who emerged because Eifert has missed some time this year. So if you are one of those owners, those are the owners who I would advocate sitting Eifert. Or if you can grab the forthcoming guy who I'm going to advocate starting, who has been widely available and hot, I would start this upcoming guy at the tight end position as well. But mystery man will remain a mystery until we get to him. For the stardom section, I would advocate starting Derek Carr against the San Diego Chargers. He's thrown for multiple touchdowns in 11 of 13 games if you exclude the season opener that he was knocked out of early, and I think that's a pretty reasonable expectation. He's tossed multiple touchdown passes in 4 straight games. He's averaging over 250 yards passing per game, but again, you toss out that injury-shortened first game, and that number rises substantially to 271 passing yards per game. I would easily start him over Aaron Rodgers if you happen to roster both. Carr spanked the Chargers earlier in the season with 289 yards passing and 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions in that contest as well. So pretty easy to get Derek Carr into your lineup and feel good about it. At running back, guy that I'm going to advocate starting, this is a guy who I would start in 12-team leagues or larger at either the RB2 if you're really hurting, or flex. Unless you've got a super loaded roster, this guy has a really good matchup, and that's Spencer Ware. Now, he is the number 2 in an RBBC. You'd expect Chuck West to get the lion's share of the touches since he did when the two were both healthy recently. But Ware is the goal line back, and the Browns are giving up the second most rushing yards to opponents this season, 134.9 per game. That's plenty of yardage to go around for 2 backs. The 2 games that Ware has eclipsed double digits in carries, he's rushed for 96 yards and over 100 yards. So we're talking about 210 yards of rushing yards in his 2 games combined of double-digit carries. I think Ware gets double digits in carries this week. Chiefs are huge favorites. Alex Smith, rarely throwing it more than 25 times of late, has done that just 1 time in the last 5 games, and that should be a very run-heavy approach. Ware is the featured goal line back, so at the least he could get a cheap touchdown, and not going to need a heck of a lot more from him to pay off with the state of running back what it is. And I think that 60 yards rushing on 10 to 15 carries with a touchdown is very much within reach for Ware, and the upside's actually greater than that. So I do like Ware quite a bit this week. Forget the revenge narrative for a second, but Deshaun Jackson faces his former team, and they're not good at defending wide receivers. Jackson's coming off of a big 6 for 153 and 1 touchdown line against the Bills. Over the last 5 games, he's caught 21 passes for 429 yards and 4 scores. So he's playing at a very high level right now with Kirk Cousins. Eagles rank 26th defending number 1 receivers according to Football Outsiders, and they've allowed the 5th most fantasy points per game to receivers while also surrendering 22 touchdowns to receivers, the 3rd highest mark in the league. Jackson's a big play receiver, and like I said, throw out the revenge narrative, but this is a guy who does seem to like to play his former team, missed out on playing them earlier in the season, but last year he played them twice. He erupted for 9 receptions for 243 yards receiving and a touchdown. I expect another big effort from him this week. They just don't have the cornerbacks to take a explosive playmaker like Deshaun Jackson out of the game, and that makes him a strong wide receiver 3 for me. Finally, in the same contest, I like Zach Ertz quite a bit this week. He was a breakout-ish candidate last year and this year, and he's really starting to break out of late. Over the last 2 games, he's been targeted 20 times. He's turned those 20 targets into 13 receptions for 176 yards, receiving, and a touchdown. And I see little reason to expect Sam Bradford to stop throwing it frequently to his 6'5", 249-pound tight end. The Redskins have been tough on tight ends, but with the kind of volume that Ertz is getting, if he's going to get another 10-plus targets, he's he's easily going to deliver tight end 1 numbers. And on that note, that's going to wrap things up for this week's Sit 'em Start 'em podcast. Check out all of our articles and other video podcasts, as well as our active fantasy football forum. Get yourself ready to win this championship and championship week for most gamers. Until next time, good luck.